Hello there, and welcome to VelvetMind Stories. If you've found yourself here tonight, maybe it's because your mind is still wandering, or sleep hasn't quite arrived yet. Either way, you're in the right place. Here, we tell slow stories, quietly told, thoughtfully woven, to help you drift off, with something gentle to listen to. Tonight's journey? We're going back in time, way back, to the forgotten rituals of sleep. What it meant, how it looked, and how we may have lost something by leaving those ancient rhythms behind. So, before we begin, if this kind of calm storytelling helps you relax, please do consider subscribing to the channel. And if you'd like to support us, please leave a comment telling us, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? We read everyone. Now, fluff your pillow, soften your thoughts, and let the day slip quietly away. Let's begin our story with a sky full of stars and the earliest humans beneath its glow. In the stillness of a time we barely remember, when fire was the only light and the stars above were more than decoration. They were calendars, maps, companions. That's where tonight's story begins. Before bedrooms, pillows, or bedtime routines, sleep was not something to manage, but something to welcome. Our ancient ancestors slept with the earth's rhythm. The cycle of the sun and moon wasn't tracked by devices. It was felt in the skin, seen in the sky, understood like breath. They followed light and temperature, not alarm clocks. Can you imagine that? Sleeping under a sky so dark and vast, you could see every constellation, each night a little different, each star a quiet guardian. We believe these early humans practiced segmented sleep, falling asleep after sunset, waking for a little while in the middle of the night, then drifting back until dawn. And that gap between sleeps? It wasn't empty. It was a time of reflection, soft conversation, maybe creativity. Some might have stirred the fire. Some might have just watched the sparks fly upward into the dark. Have you ever woken in the middle of the night and felt oddly calm? Not anxious, just present. Maybe your body remembers something our modern world has forgotten. Perhaps our bodies remember something our world has long forgotten. Have you ever felt that? Night was sacred, not just dark. Communal, intentional. Sleep often happened in shared shelters, with warmth from one another, and the central hearth. The fire wasn't just for light or cooking. It was for comfort, protection, and rhythm. Flames flickering on the ceiling, shadows dancing softly across woven mats or packed earth. Imagine the quiet sounds. Crackling fire, distant owls. Maybe the rhythmic breathing of someone beside you. It wasn't lonely. It wasn't rushed. And when sleep didn't come, they listened to the wind, the stars, or their own thoughts. That pause between the first and second sleep may have been a time for creativity. Some researchers believe people used that mid-sleep hour to share stories, make plans, or simply think. Imagine that stillness, a world where even insomnia had a place. Not a problem to fix, but a part of the night's natural shape. No blue light, no to-do lists glowing from your screen. Just time, a pause between dreaming. And so they drifted back gently into the second sleep, more vivid, more restful, and closer to dawn. This was sleep before science, before sleep apps, before noise machines and supplements. It was a ritual, a sacred rhythm wrapped in firelight and shared quiet. Isn't it strange how something so old can feel so distant and yet oddly familiar? The fire wasn't just for light or cooking. It was for comfort, protection, and rhythm. Flames flickering on the ceiling, shadows dancing softly across woven mats or packed earth. Imagine the quiet sounds: crackling fire, distant owls, maybe the rhythmic breathing of someone beside you. It wasn't lonely. It wasn't rushed. And when sleep didn't come, they listened to the wind, the stars, or their own thoughts. That pause between the first and second sleep may have been a time for creativity. Some researchers believe people used that mid-sleep hour to share stories, make plans, or simply think. Imagine that stillness, a world where even insomnia had a place. Not a problem to fix, but a part of the night's natural shape. No blue light, no to-do lists glowing from your screen. Just time, a pause between dreaming. And so they drifted back gently into the second sleep, more vivid, more restful, and closer to dawn. This was sleep before science, before sleep apps, before noise machines and supplements. It was a ritual, a sacred rhythm wrapped in firelight and shared quiet. Isn't it strange how something so old can feel so distant and yet oddly familiar? In the stillness of a time we barely remember, when fire was the only light and the stars above were more than decoration. They were calendars, maps, companions. That's where tonight's story truly begins. Before the idea of bedrooms, before pillows and routines, sleep wasn't something we scheduled. It was something we followed. Our earliest ancestors didn't resist the night. They lived in harmony with it. The sun dipped below the horizon, and with it, activity slowed. Darkness wasn't feared. It was natural, expected. They didn't fall asleep staring into screens or checking tomorrow's tasks. They let the stars guide them, the air cool them, the fire warm their bones. Sleep came in waves, not as one long stretch, but often in two peaceful acts. The first began just after twilight, when the body relaxed and the sounds of the day faded away. The second would come later, after a period of stillness in the night. And in between, time to reflect, to stoke the fire, to listen, to dreams, to wind, to one another. It was called segmented sleep, and some believe it was the default rhythm. For much of early humanity, no clocks, no alarms, just instinct. In the hush of the night, when the fire crackled low and steady, those early humans knew a different kind of silence. It was not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence, of being with the earth, the sky, and each other. They didn't resist wakefulness in the dark. They embraced it. Between the first and second sleep, there was a space, a pause in the dark, where stories could flow like the embers, and thoughts were not rushed or hidden. Some may have risen quietly, sat near the fire, or stepped outside to look at the stars. The stars then were not just ornaments. They were guides, memories, and stories in themselves. Imagine it, lying awake in the still night, hearing the soft breathing of those nearby, watching the sky shift ever so gently. Perhaps they whispered dreams. Perhaps they reflected on the hunt or the harvest. No phones, no clocks, only instinct and time and wonder. This wakeful period was not insomnia. It was belonging. Some cultures even considered it a sacred hour, a time for prayer or gentle tasks. And when it ended, they slipped quietly into that second sleep, deeper, slower, carried by the rhythm of the night itself. A rhythm now lost, but not forgotten. Somewhere in the quiet spaces between your own nights, that ancient rhythm may still flicker. You might wake at 3 a.m. and feel frustrated. But what if your body was simply remembering? This natural break in the night, between sleep and sleep, may have been when creativity bloomed. Some historians believe stories were born here, not just told, but shaped by quiet minds and flickering light. The first myths, the first songs, the first lullabies, perhaps they came not from dreams, but from the gentle hush between them. And as the stars wheeled slowly overhead, our ancestors listened to the fire, to the wind outside, to the breathing of the world. There was no rush, no need to fix sleeplessness, because sleeplessness wasn't broken. Some sat in meditation, some prayed, others simply lay still, letting thoughts wander, as if watching clouds across a moonlit sky. This time of night was not considered lost. It was lived, and when the second wave of sleep arrived, it carried with it a deeper kind of rest, not the hurried collapse of exhaustion, but a calm surrender, the kind of sleep that knows it is safe, connected, and part of something larger than itself. It's strange to think how far we've come from those nights. But maybe, just maybe, we're not meant to forget them entirely. And so they drifted back gently into what was called the second sleep, a stretch of rest closer to dawn, often described as deeper, more vivid, more restorative. Some researchers believe This segmented sleep was common for thousands of years, across continents, cultures, and climates. It's only in the last few hundred years that we began to expect ourselves to sleep in a single, unbroken block. But perhaps that expectation is more modern than natural. The body has rhythms, cycles, a language it speaks beneath the surface. And when we listen, really listen, we may start to hear what it's been trying to say. That night wakefulness, that quiet pause in the middle of sleep, might not be a flaw. It might be memory, something ancient whispering back to us. Imagine that moment, stirring at 2 a.m., and instead of reaching for your phone, you simply breathe, listen, and let yourself exist in the stillness. You are not alone. Your ancestors sat beside fires, watched the wind move through trees, and let silence wrap around them like a second blanket. In that deep middle night, when the world feels paused, you are closer to them than you might ever be in daylight. And in that pause, there is something sacred, a soft space between the dreaming. Some researchers believe people use that mid-sleep hour to share stories, make plans, or simply think. Imagine that stillness, a world where even insomnia had a place. Not a problem to fix, but a part of the night's natural shape. No blue light, no to-do lists glowing from your screen. Just time, a pause between dreaming. And so they drifted back gently into the second sleep, more vivid, more restful, and closer to dawn. This was sleep before science, before sleep apps, before noise machines and supplements. It was a ritual, a sacred rhythm wrapped in firelight and shared quiet. Isn't it strange how something so old can feel so distant and yet oddly familiar? Then came the crops and the turning of soil. The agricultural age began slowly, with seeds planted deep and roots that would later change sleep forever. Suddenly, humans weren't just following nature, they were shaping it. And with farming came structure. Seasons became schedules. Sunlight became labor. And sleep became secondary. Waking up early wasn't just a choice anymore. It was survival. Tending fields at sunrise. Harvesting before the weather turned. Guarding crops at night from wild animals or thieves. These new routines pushed humans toward a more compressed sleep cycle. Homes changed too. The free, open shelters of early humanity turned into huts, then houses, and walls came up between people and the natural sky. For the first time, sleep began to happen indoors, away from the wind, the stars, and sometimes each other. It wasn't all worse, of course. Safety improved. Weather was less of a worry. But something soft and timeless was slowly being left behind. And in those first farming villages, life revolved around the fields. Every sunrise brought purpose. Planting, tending, harvesting. Night no longer meant community sleep beneath open skies. It meant returning to homes with walls, where the rhythm of rest was constrained by work demands. Imagine the new soundscape: the wind through wooden shutters, the creak of simple homes settling, and the soft closing of doors that cut you off from the world. In these early huts, families lay on straw mats or animal skins, wrapped in layers to stay warm. Privacy and comfort were rare luxuries. Yet still, small rituals persisted. The smell of drying herbs hung by entryways, stories whispered before the hearth, and the flicker of oil lamps to chase away shadows. The first bedrooms may have been simple alcoves, but they marked a new separation between day and night, between labor and rest. And with that separation came new pressures. Wake-up calls no longer came from nature's soft light. They came from the tasks awaiting you. Farms needed tending at dawn. Livestock needed care before the heat. Every delay risked the harvest. So sleep became compressed, a single stretch of hours to sustain the next day. The pause between sleeps grew shorter, until it faded entirely. Still, people held on to small comforts: a shared blanket, a quiet word, the scent of smoke from a hearth. Even as structures rose, human warmth remained essential. As settlements grew, so did responsibilities. Crops were no longer wild experiments. They became the backbone of survival. Entire families depended on consistent routines, and sleep was shaped by necessity, not comfort. Roosters and bells replaced inner rhythms. Time was broken into fixed portions, not by nature, but by farming demands. Sleep turned into a task, an obligation between labors, and slowly this new rhythm of rest spread across villages, towns, and eventually cities. The memory of segmented sleep, of peaceful midnight awakenings, faded into myth. But echoes of the old ways lingered, like faint stars behind the clouds. In rural corners, elders still spoke of the first rest and second dreaming. Some households continued to wake briefly in the night, to tend a fire, soothe a child, or simply listen to the quiet. Even in transition, the spirit of earlier sleep rituals survived, not in grand gestures, but in small choices. A lullaby sung in the dark, lavender tucked under a pillow, or silence honored in the space between dusk and dawn. The agricultural revolution may have changed the world, but the longing for gentle rest remained. The earth still turned, the stars still whispered, and deep in their bones, humans still remembered what it meant to fall asleep beside the fire. And yet, even as agriculture reshaped sleep, humans held on to rituals. In rural villages, people still honored the night, some leaving candles burning in windows, others placing protective charms above doorways, hoping for restful dreams and safe passage through the dark. Seasonal rhythms also brought nighttime ceremonies, harvest festivals, moon rituals, and storytelling gatherings held by firelight. In many cultures, the moon was a marker of time, its waxing and waning intertwined, with planting, harvesting, and resting. Some communities still slept outside during warm seasons, beneath wooden awnings or under open skies, especially during festivals or pilgrimages. This slow transition from nature-led rest to schedule-bound sleep was not abrupt. It unfolded over generations, but step by step, the quiet reverence of night gave way to duty, to productivity, and eventually to our modern obsession with efficiency. Still, deep in the quiet parts of rural life, echoes of ancient sleep survived, soft, flickering, and almost forgotten. Even now, if you find yourself resting in a quiet countryside, with crickets chirping, air cool on your skin, and moonlight spilling through the window, you might feel it. A tug, a memory, a whisper from long ago, when sleep was not a challenge, but a return to something whole. Let's wander now through the stone streets of ancient cities, from the Nile to the Aegean Sea, from Rome's columns to Mesopotamia's temples. In ancient Egypt, sleep wasn't just rest. It was a spiritual journey. Dreams were believed to be messages, whispers from the gods, or visits from the departed. There were sacred sleep temples, where priests interpreted visions and rituals were performed to invite divine dreams. Oils were anointed on the skin, incense was burned, soft prayers spoken into the night air. Egyptians believed the soul left the body during sleep, traveling elsewhere, returning at dawn. Imagine treating every night as a sacred voyage. How gently one must lie down when the spirit is expected to leave. In ancient Egypt, sleep was not just a bodily need. It was a passage, spiritual, mysterious, and deeply respected. They believed that when a person slept, the soul would leave the body, drifting into other realms, exploring places only accessible in dreams. Dreams themselves were sacred, not simply fragments of memory, but messages, whispers from the gods, echoes of ancestors, visions of what might come or what needed to be understood. Some temples were designed for this very purpose: to sleep, to dream, to receive divine instruction. They called it dream incubation, a sacred rite. Priests would prepare the dreamer with rituals, with incense, chants, and oil poured gently on the skin. The space would be quiet, dark, intentionally shaped to guide the soul. A night in such a temple wasn't ordinary rest. It was a meeting with the divine, a night where sleep was the gateway to insight and healing. Even ordinary homes carried these beliefs. Small amulets under pillows, spells recited softly at dusk, the scent of blue lotus drifting through the warm night air. To them, sleep wasn't a pause in life. It was a continuation of spirit, a time when the body rested, but the soul wandered freely, through the stars, through memory, and through meaning. Now, let's drift westward, to the olive groves and marble courtyards of ancient Greece and Rome. In Greece, sleep was personified, given a name, a shape, and a god. Hypnos, the gentle deity of sleep, was often depicted with wings, brushing his touch softly over eyes to bring rest. Sleep was sacred, but never feared. They even honored napping. Midday rest was part of life, especially in warmer regions. To pause, to doze under a shaded tree, was not laziness, but wisdom. In Greek mythology, Hypnos lived in a quiet cave by the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. No light ever entered. Poppies grew at the entrance, and his presence brought peace. His twin brother? Thanatos, the god of death. A poetic reminder that sleep and death have always been linked, close and calm. Then came Rome, a civilization of roads, order, and strategy. And yet, even here, sleep had its rhythms. The Romans often practiced polyphasic sleep, dividing rest into multiple segments. An early sleep, a wakeful interlude, and a second sleep toward morning. Some even took daytime naps, what they called meridiatio. Elite Roman homes had rooms designed just for sleep, curtains drawn, oil lamps flickering low, silence encouraged. They understood that quiet was precious, rest was necessary, and the night was to be respected. So even as their empires expanded, their cities buzzed, and their world grew complex, they still made space for the hush of sleep. But as cities grew brighter, the night slowly began to dim in a different way. Light, once a luxury, became more available. First torches, then candles, lamps with oil, and eventually fire that could burn through the night. At first, it was a marvel, a room glowing well past dusk, shadows dancing longer, more hours to talk, read, write. But light has a quiet cost. With each flame, the deep velvet of nighttime faded. Sleep began to shift, no longer fully guided by moonlight and stars. People started staying awake longer, not for reverence, but for routine, not for dreaming, but for doing. And yet, even in the glow of lamps, old rituals survived. In Egypt, bedtime oils were still applied. In Greece, poppies and fig leaves were kept near the bed. In Rome, soft chants or protective charms were whispered as lamps were extinguished. Every culture, even as they embraced new tools, held on to small pieces of their sleep heritage. A sachet of lavender tucked beneath a pillow, a doorway brushed with blessed herbs, a bedtime prayer passed from parent to child. And still, there was silence, not the kind we know now, punctuated by phones and hums, but true stillness, a hush that wrapped the night like a blanket. Sleep wasn't yet a thing to conquer. It was still a place to go, a journey inward, a return to something ancient. Even as the world changed, the soul of night remained untouched for just a while longer. By the time we reached the Middle Ages, the world had grown darker, and not just because of the setting sun. Streets were narrow, villages were walled, and fear of the unknown clung to the edges of night like a cold mist. Yet still, people slept, and often they slept in two parts. First sleep and second sleep. That's what old journals, letters, and religious texts called them, especially in England, France, and Italy. Between the two, an hour or two of calm, wakeful time. This wasn't considered a problem. It was just the way night unfolded. You might rise to stoke the fire, check on livestock, pray quietly, or even visit a neighbor. It was a rhythm, not a disruption. Homes were humble. Most families lived in just one room. A hearth in the center, straw mattresses on the floor, and perhaps an animal or two sleeping nearby. There was no privacy, but there was warmth and a shared rhythm that moved through the dark, like a gentle wave. When one person stirred, others often stirred too. Breathing slowed together, or rose together, with the crackling of the fire or the chill of wind sneaking in. Children, parents, even grandparents, all curled close under wool and linen. The sounds of sleep were not silent, but steady. You might hear the creak of wood, the quiet shifting of limbs, or whispered prayers passed from one bedroll to another. The concept of being alone at night was almost unheard of, and in that middle space, between sleep and waking, there was stillness, a pause, not filled with screens or noise, but with thought, a soft wondering, maybe even peace. Out in the streets, the darkness had its own guardians. Night watchmen paced slowly through towns, calling out the hour and reminding people the world was still turning, even while they rested. Their voices echoed off stone and wood, a strange comfort for those who woke mid-sleep. Sometimes people rose when they heard the bell, not in panic, but in ritual. They might light a candle, sit by the fire, whisper a prayer, or simply gaze into the flame. This waking time had a name. In many places, it was called the watching hour. Not a disruption, but a moment to reflect. And then, gently, people would return to sleep. No sleep apps, no melatonin, just a quiet return. Their minds not frantic, but softened by the hush of the world around them. Inside homes, sleep was a shared experience. Most families lived in a single room. Parents, children, even livestock nearby. There were no walls between sleepers. No headphones, no blackout curtains. Instead, a closeness that carried warmth through winter and comfort through night. The breathing of others, the creak of timber, the whisper of wind through thatched roofs. It all blended into a gentle lullaby. Privacy was rare, but connection was constant. If one person stirred, others often woke as well, not with annoyance, but with quiet awareness, a shared rhythm where dreams drifted together and waking was almost communal. Sometimes the night was broken intentionally to tend to a restless child, to feed an infant, or just to sit with one's thoughts while the embers still glowed. And even in those waking moments, there was peace, the kind of peace that doesn't demand silence, just stillness. They understood sleep not as isolation, but as something folded gently into the life of the home. A pause, not a shutdown, a soft breath between chapters of the night. Even in the darkness of the Middle Ages, people carried small rituals to guide them through the night. Before sleep, herbal sachets were placed under pillows. Lavender, chamomile, rosemary, fragrant defenses against bad dreams, and perhaps bad spirits. Iron horseshoes were nailed above beds, believed to ward off the unseen. Spells were murmured. Prayers were whispered, not loudly, but softly, like secrets sent into the dark. It wasn't just superstition, it was intention, a way of preparing the body and soul for sleep's descent. Some families still kept a sacred object nearby, a candle, a book of psalms, a wooden carving passed through generations. And though life outside was often cold, harsh, and uncertain, these nightly rituals made the bed a refuge, a place not just to rest, but to feel safe, to feel human, to feel something ancient, persisting through the flickering of time. But like many old ways, this rhythm began to fade. With time came change, and with change, light. Artificial light crept into homes, first as flickering candles, then brighter flames, and eventually gas and electricity. Night no longer meant full darkness, and slowly the space between first and second sleep grew shorter. For many, it disappeared altogether. No more waking hours in quiet reflection. No more stories around the fire. Between dreams, sleep became a single stretch, a compressed necessity in a busying world. And as the centuries turned, few remembered that it had ever been otherwise. Yet, somewhere deep inside us, those patterns still linger. That middle of the night wakefulness, that hour of stillness we sometimes feel, might not be insomnia. It might be memory, ancient rhythms, echoing softly through time, calling us to listen, just for a moment, before we drift away again. Then came the steam, the machines, the shift whistles and factory bells. The Industrial Revolution changed nearly everything, including sleep. For the first time in history, people lived by the clock, not the sun. Factories ran on shifts. Work began before dawn. Men, women, even children woke in darkness to begin their labor. Sleep was squeezed into whatever hours remained, and it had to be deep, fast, and functional. There was no time for dreaming at the hearth. Gone were the gentle awakenings between first and second sleep. Now, if you woke in the night, you were expected to fight it, not embrace it. Gaslights began to glow in city streets and factory halls. Later, electricity flooded homes, bringing daylight into the night. Shops stayed open longer. People worked later. Evenings were no longer meant for slowing down, but for squeezing in more hours of productivity. And as light filled every corner, darkness, once a natural cue for rest, was pushed away. We taught ourselves to ignore tiredness. We adjusted, rewired our routines, and turned sleep into a hurdle rather than a healing ritual. Doctors began to speak of insomnia as a modern condition. Sleep became a medical issue instead of a nightly ceremony. And with that, the quiet reverence our ancestors once gave to the night was lost beneath the humming lights and ticking clocks. For the average worker, there was little time to wonder or dream. Rest became something you earned, and often something you went without. With the rise of industrial schedules, sleep was no longer a natural rhythm, but something to be managed. Shift workers lived on rotating clocks, sometimes working nights, sometimes early mornings. The body, confused, tired, struggled to adapt. Families rarely slept at the same time. Meals, rest, and even conversation had to fit around the factory bell. Children were affected too, waking early to help or simply to stay quiet, while parents slept during the day. In cities, night became busier. Trains ran late. Bars stayed open. Streetlights cast a glow that made it hard to remember what real darkness looked like. Sleep was no longer sacred. It was often interrupted by noise, by light, by the weight of responsibilities. Still, some resisted. Writers and thinkers found beauty in the quiet hours. Artists painted late into the night. Poets wandered moonlit streets in search of something deeper. But they were the exception. For most people, the night had become a pause, not a refuge. And sleep, once shared, once sacred, was now just another task on a growing list of demands. In the growing cities of the industrial age, sleep was rarely peaceful. Noise echoed through the night. Factory whistles, clattering carts, footsteps on cobblestone streets. Apartments were crowded. Thin walls meant little privacy. And for many, the only time alone was when the world slept. Sleep hygiene, as we know it now, didn't exist. People dozed in their work clothes, on thin mattresses or makeshift beds, sometimes sharing with others to save space. Even the idea of 8 uninterrupted hours was becoming unrealistic. Doctors began writing about sleeplessness Insomnia entered the public vocabulary. Tonic makers promised miracle cures. Sleep, once so natural, had become a commercial concern. And yet, people adapted. They napped during breaks. They created rituals with what little they had. A favorite blanket, a bit of lavender, a quiet moment before rest. The story of sleep didn't end. It simply changed form. From sacred ritual to scheduled task. From firelight to gaslight. The industrial world shaped sleep in its own image. And even today, some of those habits linger. And now we arrive at the age of scrolling, of endless notifications, midnight emails, blue light flickering on tired faces. Our bedrooms, once a retreat, have become extensions of our digital lives. Phones glow beside our pillows. Laptops hum quietly into the night. Smartwatches track our rest, while quietly disrupting it. We know more about sleep than any generation before. We've measured brainwaves, mapped sleep cycles, named every phase of rest. And yet, we're sleeping less than ever. A paradox, a warning. The world we've created makes rest feel optional. We push past yawns, ignore fatigue, delay bedtime to catch one more episode, answer one more message, scroll one more page. And when sleep doesn't come, we worry. We reach for apps, supplements, soundscapes, tools to fix what nature once provided freely. We live in a time when sleep has become something to optimize, not something sacred, but something scheduled. Smart rings tell us if we've slept well. Charts and graphs track dreams we don't even remember. A night of rest becomes a performance, measured by numbers on a screen. But in chasing perfect sleep, we often forget the basics. Quiet, darkness, safety, a mind at peace. Our ancestors knew this, not through science, but through instinct. They listened to the wind. They followed the fire's rhythm. They let the night guide them, not a sleep consultant. Now we resist stillness. We fear it. Silence makes us fidget. Darkness feels too empty. So we fill the space with content, connection, and artificial comfort. We've created a world where rest must be earned, not simply allowed. But what if we remembered? What if we let go of the metrics, of the pressure, of the guilt, and simply rested? And maybe you felt it too, that quiet pull in the middle of the night, when your eyes open, but the world is still, not from anxiety, but something older, a forgotten rhythm, buried deep in your biology. It's not a flaw, it's not insomnia. It's your body remembering how night used to be, how sleep was once a dance, not a straight line, how waking briefly was a chance to reflect, to whisper, to dream again. We try to suppress this now, with pills, with podcasts, with glowing screens. But what if we embraced it? What if, in those moments, we did nothing? No scrolling, no worrying, just breathed, listened, waited for sleep to return, like a tide coming in, soft, certain, unrushed. You are not broken. You are simply remembering. So maybe the question isn't, how do I fall asleep faster? But instead, how can I return to what sleep once was? Not a goal, not a struggle, but a homecoming. Maybe sleep lives in the quiet we resist, in the darkness we chase away, in the slow, soft stillness we forgot how to love. Tonight, you don't need to fix anything or finish anything. You don't need to fight for rest. You just need to let it find you, like it did for your ancestors, beneath stars, beside a fire, surrounded by silence. Close your eyes, take a breath, and imagine the old night. Not the one filled with screens, but the one filled with space, room to breathe, time to wake and sleep again. You're not late. You're not behind. You're right on time. Just rest. And now, as this story slows and your eyes begin to drift, I hope you've found a little comfort in this quiet place. Sleep is not a task to master. It's a gift to receive. So tonight, give yourself permission to rest, to forget the noise, to remember the stars, to breathe like the fire once flickered in some ancient shelter, soft, steady, warm. If you ever have a quiet topic you'd like us to explore next time, feel free to leave a gentle suggestion in the comments below. We'd love to hear what soothes you. From all of us at VelvetMind Stories, thank you for being here. Sleep well, and good night.